Chapter 4, we will work through equations, just the basic algebra type solving of those equations, and then we'll enter into some business formulas. So when we solve those equations, there will be a missing variable. So in those first few sections, it'll be an X or an N, just sort of some letter that represents the unknown. As we move into future chapters, we're normally going to have them be something like interest or principal or an interest rate. We'll know what they are. But this section is just kind of going back through the basics of algebra. So again, just to refresh your memory of algebra, you're working with equations, so both sides must be equal. So what you do to one side of the equation, you're going to have to do to the other side, or they would no longer be equal. And then ultimately our goal is to get that X or that N or whatever that variable is by itself. So the first ones are just addition and subtraction. So those are the most easy. If we had X minus 17 equals 34, we're going to have to add 17 to both sides of that equation to get the X by itself. So then X equals 51. If we had X plus 12.23 equals 20.5, we're going to have to subtract that 12.3 from both sides of the equation to get the X by itself. So then X would be equal to 8.2. We can also have multiplication and division. So 5x is telling us it's 5 times x equals 100. So we're going to divide both sides by 5 to get the X by itself. So the X would have to be 20. The X over 8 would indicate it's X divided by 8. So it's like a fraction. So we're going to multiply both sides by 8 to get the X by itself. And then X equals 104. We also will have distributive properties in this class. So those are when you see the parentheses. So you always want to deal with what's in the parentheses first. So we've got 6. What that is saying is it's 6 times m minus 2. So we can't simplify m minus 2 any further, but we can take the 6 and multiply it by everything inside the parentheses. So 6 times m gives us 6m. 6 times the negative 2 gives us a negative 12. And then we're kind of back to our formula where we can go back to our adding and subtracting and multiplying and dividing. So then our first thing is to add 12 to both sides of the equation. So that's 6m equals 42. Again, to get that m by itself, now we have to divide both sides by 6. So then m is equal to 7. So you always have to deal with the parentheses first and then get it down to a level that you can simplify. Now, ultimately, what we're trying to build into, though, and what you will mostly have in these chapters is what the textbook calls application problems. So those are really like word problems. So sometimes students struggle with those. So you always got to read carefully. So they give you some little steps to think about as you're reading a word problem or an application problem. Read it carefully. Identify what you're actually solving for. What is your variable? And then take those words that they're giving you and translate those into a mathematical equation, and then solve for your equation just like we have done on the past slides. Now this one is a trickier one, so sometimes we do have some of these that are a little more tricky. So we've got a woman who has nickels and dimes, like say she's got a pocket full of nickels and dimes. She knows that in total this pocket full of nickels and dimes is $3. She also knows she has 12 more dimes than she does nickels. So how many nickels does she have? So we're looking for our N, that will represent our nickels. And what do we know about it? We obviously know it's worth 5 cents, and we know that dimes are worth 10 cents. But then when we go to the quantity, we don't know how many nickels, but we know that the dimes are the nickels plus 12. So then if you jump down to my formula, I've got the 0.05 times n, which represents the number of nickels, and then 0.10, which represents the dimes, times n plus 12, which is the quantity of dimes. But again, now you see the parenthesis, so the first thing you should think of is I got to get rid of those. So I'm going to take the 0.1, which again represents that 10 cents, times our n gives us 0.1n. 0.1 times the 12 gives us 1.2. And now we're again at a level that we can simplify it. So we have the two n's, they're like terms, we can add those together. So we've got 0.15n plus the 1.2 equals the 3. Now we subtract the 1.2 from both sides of the equation, so we have 0.15n equals 1.8. Divide both sides by 0.15, and we get n equals 12. Then we're going to ultimately build into filling in formulas. That's ultimately what we'll be doing through the rest of the chapter or the rest of the textbook. So we want to kind of understand that. So if we have a formula like interest equals principal times rate times time, and again, we have a little word problem that if we have $3,500 invested at 9.5% and we earn $748.13 in interest, how long must it have been invested? So again, we know our formula, so we're going to just fill in those blanks. So interest is $748.13, principal is $3,500, the rate is 9.5% or 0.095. What we don't know is the time. How long must it have been invested? So we leave the t as our missing variable. But then I can simplify on the right-hand side of that equation. 3,500 times the 0.095 gives us 332.5 times the t. So don't forget that t is still there. Then divide both sides by the 332.5, and you end up with the time being 2.25 years. So again, you'll be given a formula. You're going to fill it all in. You'll be missing one of the variables, and I always just, whatever it's missing, I'm going to leave that as my, like in this case, the t for time, and then solve for that. So then that's really the key, is to be able to read those things and apply algebra to solve it.